2 days after the Spanish Grand Prix, US Air Force, Marine and Navy aircraft, including the Navy's brand new FA-18 Hornet, attacked targets in Libya, including barracks, airbases and airports in Tripoli and Benghazi. This was in direct retaliation for the West Berlin nightclub bombing the previous week, but was also another escalation of the conflict between the US and Libya. In all, there were 40 reported Libyan casualties, none civilians for a change, and 1 US aircraft was lost with its 2 crew killed. Colonel Gaddafi was warned by a telephone call just in time to escape from his house, which was bombed. Allegedly, the warning came from Italian Prime Minister Bettino Craxi, while both France and Spain refused to allow overflight of their airspace. The majority of the attacking F-111 bombers and the tankers that refuelled them were based in the UK, and Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher came in for much criticism, even from an establishment paper like the Sunday Times, for allowing the use of British bases for the strikes. A few days later, British journalist John McCarthy was kidnapped in Beirut, and several other journalists were killed by Shia paramilitary groups in retaliation for the bombings of Libya. Since the outbreak of the Lebanese Civil War in 1982, hostages had often been taken in Beirut. Brian Keenan had been kidnapped by the Islamic Jihad group a few days before the bombings, but with both UK and US governments refusing to negotiate with terrorists as a matter of policy, the fate of these hostages remained uncertain. In the early hours of the Saturday morning of race weekend, a reactor test at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic went horribly wrong, causing an explosion followed by a reactor core fire that began spewing huge amounts of radioactive smoke particles into the air. Firefighters fought valiantly to contain the flames, but as yet there remained a strict news blackout, and nobody not directly involved was even aware of the problem. And on a lighter note, another ongoing conflict ended as the Isles of Scilly, a small group of islands off the coast of Cornwall, finally made peace with the Netherlands after 335 years. The islands had been one of the last holdouts of Royalist naval forces during the English Civil War, and the new Dutch Republic had allied themselves with Cromwell's parliamentarian forces and declared war on the Royalists on Scilly. With the war's end and the execution of King Charles I, the matter seemed over, but the stories of the tiny islands still at war with the Dutch persisted. Eventually, in 1985, local historian Roy Duncan set out to debunk the legend, only to find out that, at least by some interpretations of international law, it was true. War had been declared, but no peace made. The Dutch ambassador was invited, and in April 1986 a peace treaty was officially signed, and the ambassador joked that the Cylonians could now rest easy in their beds, free of the knowledge that we could have attacked at any moment. In fact, not a single shot had been fired during the 335 years of war. The F1 grid had expanded to 26 for the Imola race, with gangly Dutch sponsor magnate Hugh Brothengatter paying for a second Zak speed to make it full 26 cars, with Martin Brundle once again using the now repaired 015 Tyrrell, and Alan Jones now debuting the new THL2 Lola with its long-awaited Ford turbo engine. On paper it looked pretty good, a remarkably compact 120-degree V6, with twin Garrett turbochargers, and was regarded as the first of the fourth-generation turbo engines, built by Cosworth in Northampton with input from the electronics division of Ford in Detroit. 2 of the new chassis were in Italy, both earmarked for Jones, while Tombe persisted in the old Hart-powered car. The comparison between the two would be interesting. It was also noticeable that the large Beatrice logos on the side pods had been replaced with Team Haas stickers, which seemed to back up rumours of financial troubles on the horizon, while Tyrrell had a new short-term sponsor, appearing with blue side pods for local cosmetics firm Kalemata, erstwhile sponsor of the Azella team. There was a sense of gloom over Imola as the team set up. The weather was cold and overcast, which didn't help, but mainly it was due to Ferrari's lamentable season so far. Admittedly, there had only been 2 races, but the Scarlet cars were so far off the pace that even the most optimistic tifosi weren't expecting much from them here. There were plenty of them, as always, but they're out of a sense of grim duty rather than excited expectation. Added to that, the previous 2 races at Imola had seen lots of cars dropping out towards the end, and with the fuel limits lower this year, most were rather gloomily predicting a rather uneventful and cautious economy run. "Not my idea of Grand Prix racing," said veteran correspondent Dennis Jenkinson. "If we're going to have economy runs, we might as well let all the cars circulate until the last one is left running and declare it the winner." Qualifying proved relatively unsurprising too. For the 3rd race in succession, the top 3 were Senna, Piquet and Mansell in that order, with Prost lining up 4th as in Spain. Alboreto gave the Tifosi some hope by placing his Ferrari 5th, splitting the two McLarens. In fact, about the most fun the Ferrari fans had all weekend was when Rosberg's car wouldn't start on Friday morning, to general merriment and jeers from the grandstands. Johansson was 7th and Arnoux 8th, with the Benettons making up the top 10. Tombe in the Hart-powered Lola was 11th, outqualifying Jones in the new Ford car by 10 places, while the Minardis were also going much better on home tarmac, with Nannini a creditable 18th after his difficult season so far, ahead of De Cesaris in 23rd. Less joy for the other small Italian team, Ozella, who brought up the rear, with Ghinzani failing to even set a time on Saturday. The weather had warmed up a bit on Sunday, though it was still overcast. The new Tyrrell would have to wait a little longer for its race debut, as Brundle bent it again just as he had at Jerez, this time on his way round to the dummy grid, so he had to hop in the spare 014 instead, while Palmer's engine refused to fire on the parade lap, and eventually the Zakspeed was dragged off the grid just as the rest came back round to line up. Derek Ongaro in the starter's box didn't see a problem and hit the button to start the race, with Palmer getting going at the tail of the field. Once again, Senna got away well to hold the lead, hotly pursued by Piquet, while Mansell was a little tardy away and had to fight off Alboreto and Rosberg. As the leaders came round the Villeneuve corner, Piquet got a slingshot past Senna into the lead, while at the Tosa hairpin, Rosberg got ahead of Mansell, and further back Nannini's good qualifying came to nothing as he was punted into the gravel at the same corner by Jones. At the end of lap 1 then, it was Piquet, Senna, Prost and Rosberg at the front, with Mansell 5th and notably dropping back and holding up Alboreto, Arnoux and the chasing pack. Piquet, meanwhile, was pulling away from Senna, who had a pair of red and white McLarens right in his mirrors. In fact, both Mansell and Senna were suffering minor technical complaints, an engine misfire in the Williams and a dodgy wheel bearing in the Lotus, and both McLarens got past Senna on lap 4 just as Mansell came in to get his engine looked at. After some fiddling, he was sent out again 3 laps adrift. The McLarens had got past Senna and swapped places, but weren't noticeably leaving him behind, and neither was Alboreto making much impression on him, so it didn't seem like the wheel bearing was too much of a problem, while further back there was some great racing going on as Johansson and the Benettons scrapped over 7th through 9th places. Tombe's engine gave up the ghost after 5 laps, and Rottengatter's turbo expired smokily after 7, and before long Dumfries was in the Lotus pit. His wheel bearing was playing up, and the team decided to withdraw the car lest he lose a wheel at speed. Further back, both Benettons had got ahead of Johansson, and now Lafitte made his way through as well, which didn't please the fans at the circuit. So now the order was Piquet leading Rosberg by about 6 seconds, then Prost, Senna and Alboreto, Arnoux some 9 seconds behind the Ferrari, chased by the 2 Benettons about the same distance behind him, then Lafitte, Johansson, Patrese, Boots and Jones and Sierra. As the McLarens lapped Danner, Senna's right rear wheel began smoking, and Alboreto swarmed past. Ayrton smoked his way back round to the pits to retire, pulling in just as Mansell came in for a second time to retire the Williams. Arnoux was in shortly afterwards for a new set of tyres, which didn't bode well on lap 13 of 60, and a lap later Lafitte was in the other Ligier to retire with transmission trouble, making the 7th retirement in 14 laps. And all the while the top 4 were pretty static, with Piquet leading Rosberg by 5 seconds, Prost following his new teammate closely, and Alboreto a few seconds behind them in 4th. Keke put his foot down a bit, setting fastest lap on lap 17 to pull the gap in a little, as Piquet seemed simultaneously to be easing off a bit, until by lap 20, 1/3 distance, just under 2 seconds covered the top 3, with Alboreto 8 seconds behind Prost, but a good 20 ahead of Berger and Fabi. The leaders passed De Angelis, coasting with a dead BMW and trying to make it back to the pits. He didn't, while Johansson made a tyre stop followed by Fabi, and now the McLarens were right up behind Piquet. The Brazilian's fuel indicators were playing up, and he wasn't sure what his consumption was, so he had eased off to play it safe. Prost had likewise backed off Rosberg, allowing the Finn to pressure Piquet. Alboreto was next in for a tyre stop on lap 25, evidently a little earlier than his team had planned, and an excellent 8.44 second stop saw him not lose 4th place. By this time Rosberg was clambering all over Piquet looking for an opening as they all lapped Johansson's Ferrari, and at the end of lap 27 Piquet went in for his own stop. The sluggish Williams stop took over 13 seconds, returning him to the track 3rd, while Rosberg and Prost diced for the lead. Alain was in next time around, another good stop, to retain 2nd, now some 17 seconds behind Rosberg, who had yet to stop, with Piquet 26 seconds off the leader. With his new boots, Prost put up the new fastest lap and circuit record on lap 32, and at the end of that lap Rosberg peeled in for his own stop. A sticking wheel nut cost him a lot of time, and Prost went by into the lead, celebrating by breaking the lap record again. By now, Arnoux had also got ahead of Berger for 5th place, while Fabi's engine was beginning to misfire and he'd lost 7th to Patrese in the Brabham. With all the front runners having made their start, Prost led Rosberg by 9.7 seconds, with Piquet 17.5 behind the Finn and Alboreto another 10 or so behind him. Berger's stop had put him back behind Fabi, but the Austrian had soon caught his teammate back up again, and the pair were duelling once more, as last year's F3000 champion Christian Danner pulled over with electrical problems. Prost lapped the Benetton as they scrapped over 7th, and Johansson had now caught up to the green cars too. Cameras cut away to watch Alboreto for a couple of minutes, during which time Berger got past Fabi and Johansson got past both of them. Teo pulled in to retire with an engine misfire at the end of the lap. So, with 2/3 distance gone, there were 13 cars left in the race, and most of them were simply circulating and keeping an eye on the fuel gauge, except Piquet in 3rd, who couldn't trust his and was being overcautious. Before long he had Alboreto looming in his mirrors, and the fans at the circuit woke up a bit with the prospect of a Ferrari podium. They needn't have got too excited though, as Piquet turned up the gas a little and maintained the gap at a little over 2 seconds. Arnoux dropped out with 14 laps to go, promoting Patrese to 5th and Johansson into the points. Then, on lap 50, the Williams team signalled to Piquet that they'd done some calculations and he ought to be fine on fuel, so he opened out the stops a bit and marched away from Alboreto. With 20 seconds between each of the top 3, though, it looked like unless there was another slew of late dropouts, the end of the race was going to be a bit of a damp squib. There was still a bit of racing happening further down, though, as Berger had caught Johansson again and was right on his tail as the pair of them lapped Brundle, who in his turn was lapping Ghinzani. Brundle pulled out to pass the Azella, wrong-footing Johansson, who'd just pulled out himself, and Berger made a banzai move round the outside to take the place, only to be balked by Brundle and nearly let Stefan back through again. But once they'd both gotten past the Tyrrell, Berger managed to make the place secure. It was now just 4 laps from the end, and Piquet's charge had taken him to within 3.3 seconds of Rosberg in 2nd, and the next time round he was right on the McLaren's tail. The pair were approaching Johansson to lap him, again just as the Swede was himself lapping another car, in this case Sura's Arrows. All of them got past the Swiss driver without incident though, as Alboreto fumed into the pits with a turbo failure just 3 laps from the end. The directors stuck with the Ferrari for 45 stationary seconds before cutting back to the track, just in time for Rosberg to pull off with dry tanks. So, Piquet was 2nd, but he could still win if Prost's fuel situation was the same as Rosberg's. And soon Patrese was also rolling to a halt as Prost proceeded round his last lap. And he was clearly slowing. And then he slowed almost to a halt at Rivazza, to cheers from the crowd and a rather unhealthy noise from his engine. In desperation, he sawed away at the steering wheel, sloshing the last dregs of fuel into the intake, coasted down the hill, and gave it a little bit of a squirt to get it over the line, just as Berger arrived on the scene, nearly unlapped himself, remembered that would mean doing another lap, and slammed on the brakes to allow Prost to cross the line first, for his 22nd career win, coasting to a halt just over the line. Piquet finished 2nd and the only other man on the lead lap, while Berger's canny bit of driving ensured a first podium visit for both himself and the Benetton team. Johansson's 4th place was a scant recompense for the Tifosi's disappointment over Alboreto's late retirement, with Rosberg and Patrese making up the points 2 laps down on the leaders, but still ahead of the last cars actually running, Boutsen, Brundle and Sura. So, it was 1 win apiece for Senna, Piquet and Prost, with only 2 points covering the 3 of them at the top of the table after 3 rounds, while Williams and McLaren were close at the top of the constructors' table, and Lotus 3rd, having scored with only 1 car so far. There was a little bit of miscommunication after the race, as the reporters descended on Nelson Piquet before he'd had a chance to talk to his engineers. Asked why he'd slowed down dramatically after lap 15, and believing that his team had gotten their sums wrong and not wanting to throw them under the bus, he made up something about having to drive without a clutch, then had to modify that to say that the clutch was just slipping when asked how he'd managed to make a pit stop with no clutch, which then only prompted further questions about how he'd managed a lap record with the slipping clutch. He probably just wished he'd kept his mouth shut. At any rate, the teams had a couple of weeks to plan for the annual visit to Monaco.